Rick Crusher Dalton was a big man, towering, broad-shouldered, and rugged, with a look that demanded attention. His thick beard covered half his face, but you could always see that signature smirk beneath it. A worn-out leather jacket clung to his frame like a second skin, giving him the air of a man who had seen and done it all. And in his biker gang? He wasn't just a leader, he was the leader. The man with the wildest challenges, the boldest jokes, and the toughest attitude. That day, Rick and his gang rode into a quiet little town, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, where life was simple, peaceful. The sun cast long shadows over the sleepy streets, the air was crisp, and everything felt untouched. Too quiet. Too calm. Exactly the kind of place that needed a little stirring up, in Rick's opinion. As the gang rumbled down the street, their roaring motorcycles shattered the silence. Heads turned. Shopkeepers paused mid-task. Folks sitting outside a cozy little cafe glanced up, their expressions shifting from curiosity to unease. This town wasn't used to men like Rick and his crew. Some people at the outdoor tables even lowered their heads, silently praying the bikers would just keep riding past. But Rick? He lived for this. The tension. The unease. That moment when people realized he was someone who didn't care about rules. It made him grin. He swung off his bike, stretching his shoulders as if he owned the very ground he stood on. His gang followed suit, laughing, cracking jokes, acting like they had just stepped into their own personal playground. And then, Rick's smirk widened. Near the entrance of the cafe, two well-groomed dogs sat obediently. One was a golden retriever, its soft, intelligent eyes watching the world with gentle curiosity. The other, a Doberman, sat tall and stiff, its muscular frame radiating quiet discipline. Rick nudged one of his friends with an elbow, letting out a low chuckle. Well, look at these little pampered pets, he said, voice dripping with amusement. They look like they're living better than we are. His gang laughed. Rick always knew how to set the tone, how to make sure everyone was entertained. And right now, he wanted to really get a reaction. Without a second thought, he lifted his heavy boot and gave the golden retriever a light kick to its side. Not hard. Not enough to hurt. Just enough to make the dog jump. The retriever let out a sharp, surprised yelp, stumbling backward, its soft eyes now wide with confusion and fear. Instantly, the Doberman was on alert, ears perked, muscles tensed, but it didn't move. Well-trained. Disciplined. The town froze. A waitress inside the cafe let out a gasp, dropping a tray, glass shattering against the wooden floor. A child holding an ice cream cone squeezed too tight, the scoop plopping onto the pavement unnoticed. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. Rick? He just laughed. His gang let out a few hesitant chuckles, though they weren't as loud as before. One of them muttered, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, man. Rick waved him off. Come on. It's just a dog. What Rick didn't know, what not a single one of his men realized, was that these dogs, they belonged to Jason Statham. And Jason had been watching. From inside the cafe, a man sat at a small table by the window, his fingers loosely wrapped around a cup of tea. His face was sharp, unreadable, his posture relaxed. But his eyes told a different story. The soft clink of ceramic echoed in the quiet cafe as Jason set his cup down. The cafe owner, a kindly older gentleman, had seen everything. His face turned pale as realization dawned. Stepping forward, he whispered, "Sir, I think that biker just made a very, very big mistake." Jason didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply stood up. No rush. No theatrics. Just a slow, deliberate movement. The kind that made people nervous, without a single word being spoken. The bikers outside were still laughing, though, noticeably, not as loud as before. Something in the air had shifted. The townspeople weren't just scared anymore. They were waiting. One of the younger bikers, shifting uneasily, leaned toward Rick and whispered, maybe we should get going. Rick frowned. Leave? Over what? It was just a joke, man. But then the air changed. A shadow fell across the pavement. The cafe door creaked open. Boots, slow, measured, tapped against the wooden deck. Jason Statham stepped outside. His gaze was locked onto Rick, calm, unblinking, but carrying a weight that sent a chill down the biker's spine. For the first time that day, Rick felt something unfamiliar, unease. He'd been in fights before. Plenty of them. But this man? He wasn't just some local looking to pick a fight. He wasn't rattled, wasn't shouting, wasn't posturing. That was the problem. He didn't need to. The entire street fell silent. Jason stopped a few feet away, looking Rick up and down. "You kicked my dog." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Rick scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Oh, come on, mate. It was just a little tap. Relax." He forced a chuckle, his gang echoing him, though noticeably weaker this time. Jason's gaze didn't move. "You think it's funny?" Rick shrugged, shifting his weight. He was suddenly very aware that every single person in town was watching him. Jason tilted his head slightly, considering Rick's words. Then he stepped forward. Rick swallowed. Before he could react, Jason moved. Fast. Too fast. 1 second, Rick was standing tall, the next he was on the ground. Jason hadn't even thrown a punch. Just a perfectly placed movement, a shift of balance, a sweep of the leg, and Rick had hit the pavement with a heavy thud. The gang gasped. The town stared. The toughest man in the gang flat on his back. Jason didn't even smile. He just stood there, looking down at Rick, his expression unreadable. "Not so funny now, is it?" Rick scrambled up, humiliated. His face burning, he clenched his fists. He wasn't about to let some actor make a fool of him in front of his own men. But Jason? He was already 3 steps ahead. Rick swung. A wild, desperate punch. Jason sidestepped effortlessly, grabbed Rick's wrist, twisted. In a blink, Rick found himself slammed against a table, his breath knocked out of him, completely helpless. The gang? Frozen. They weren't stepping in. The townsfolk? Grinning. Jason leaned in just slightly, voice low. "You kicked my dog." He let go. Rick stumbled back. Jason didn't need to throw another punch. Rick Crusher Dalton had already lost.